Commander Nation, I have big news for you today that we all need to keep in mind as we prepare for the upcoming season. Washington's offensive tackles remain a major concern as summer approaches. Let's analyze this situation. There's more excitement surrounding this football team than we've seen in over 10 years. New owners, new front office, new coaching staff, and, perhaps most importantly, a new quarterback who could be the face of the franchise for years to come. I've been hopeful in the past, but this time feels different. Still, there's a significant issue from the previous regime that's haunted this team for the last 4 years: the lack of investment in the offensive line, specifically at left and right tackle. Did Adam Peters and his new team do enough to address fans' concerns about the offensive tackle positions this offseason? When Rivera arrived in 2020, he focused on bringing in his players, many of whom were former Carolina Panthers. He inherited 2 great tackles, Trent Williams, who was recovering from a medical issue and seeking a new contract, and Morgan Moses. Williams ended up being traded on the 3rd day of the 2020 NFL Draft for very little, and Moses was released a year later in a cost-saving move. Rivera finally found a replacement for Trent Williams when the Bears released veteran Charles Leno shortly after the 2021 NFL Draft. Sam Cosmi was drafted in the 2nd round of that same year and was initially placed at right tackle to replace Moses. However, injuries and inconsistent play led Cosmi to move to right guard, where he still plays today. A new right tackle was added last year when Rivera and his team signed Kansas City Chiefs free agent Andrew Wiley. During that same draft, Ron spent a 4th-round pick on Utah offensive tackle Braden Daniels. Daniels was injured in the preseason and placed on injured reserve with a torn rotator cuff, not seeing any regular season action as a rookie. As for Wiley, he struggled in his first year in Washington, leading the team in pressures and sacks allowed despite missing games due to injury. In Ron Rivera's 4 years in Washington, he and his team spent only 1 top 100 draft pick on an offensive tackle, and that pick turned out to be a guard. New ownership took over in July 2023, and after a disappointing season as head coach, Ron Rivera was relieved of his duties shortly after the season ended. The new ownership group, led by Josh Harris, hired respected 49ers assistant general manager Adam Peters to lead the franchise. Peters hired Dan Quinn as the new head coach, and Quinn put together a stellar coaching staff. Washington made some free agent moves on the offensive line, signing former Cowboys center Tyler Biadasz and Chiefs guard Nick Allegretti to strengthen the interior. However, no outside free agents were added at either offensive tackle spot. Optimism remained high among fans as Washington had 6 picks in the top 100 of the 2024 NFL Draft, and the offensive tackle class was said to be one of the most talented and deepest in recent draft history. It wasn't a big surprise when the Commanders selected LSU quarterback Jayden Daniels with the 2nd overall pick. The current Heisman Trophy winner was a dynamic playmaker who could beat teams with his arm and legs. What was somewhat surprising was how the next 4 picks played out. Rumors said that Washington tried to trade back into the 1st round for an offensive tackle, but the price was too high. 2 names linked to the Commanders as targets were Arizona tackle Jordan Morgan, who went 25th to the Packers, and Oklahoma tackle Tyler Guyton, who went 29th to the Cowboys. Despite 8 offensive tackles being selected in the 1st round, there were still some very good players available on day 2 when Washington was on the clock at pick 36. Instead, defensive tackle Keanu Benton, who most had projected to go in the 1st round, was still there. It wasn't a surprise when Peters turned in the card. No one can fault the trade back with Philadelphia from pick 40 to 50, gaining the Commanders another pick in the 2nd round and the selection of Michigan slot corner Mike Sainristil. What happened after that remains a mystery. With a pick at number 53 and all 4 of the previously mentioned tackles available, Peters decided to select hybrid tight end/fullback Ben Sinnott. Now, I like Ben Sinnott a lot, but I didn't like him in the middle of the 2nd round when there were still many other good tight ends on the board projected to go around later, and I didn't like the value over the remaining offensive tackles. Washington's next pick wasn't until number 67, and by then all 4 tackles had been selected, with the Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs taking the final one at pick 63. What remained on the board were some really solid tight end prospects. In fact, Ben Sinnott was the only tight end taken in the second round, and the value at the position clearly seemed to be in rounds 3 and 4. With the top 12 tackle prospects off the board, Peters decided to take his first offensive lineman early in round 3, selecting Brandon Coleman from TCU. Many draft experts had Coleman pegged as a guard due to his build, but Washington sees him as a tackle. I thought the pick represented good value and filled a major need, so this one was a home run for me. However, I had hoped that an offensive tackle drafted early in the third round would have been the second tackle selected by Washington in this draft, not the first. Round 4 saw a run on tight ends, with 5 being taken. Washington didn't have a fourth-round pick, but moving back into the fourth to secure one of those players wouldn't have been extremely costly. Surprisingly, the Commanders, with 2 fifth-round picks, still had some solid options at offensive tackle when they were on the clock. TCU tackle Christian Jones, who many projected to go in the third round, was still there. Instead, Peters opted for Temple linebacker Jordan McGee. When our pick came again at number 161, Jones was still on the board. Peters decided to draft defensive back Dominique Hampton with that selection. Christian Jones went with the next pick to the Houston Texans. As fans, it's easy to critique from afar. We have no idea how this current coaching staff felt about players on the roster. All we can really do is read between the lines and post our own mock drafts. But one thing is pretty evident: a rookie quarterback needs good protection, especially on the edges, and there are going to remain some big question marks with the current roster Adam Peters and Dan Quinn have assembled up front. My biggest question is why they didn't bring in at least one veteran free agent after they released Charles Leno, knowing they planned on drafting a rookie quarterback. It's not often great free agent tackles hit the market, but there were a handful of guys available who could have helped with this transition, like Tyron Smith, Jonah Williams, and Mike Onwenu. Still, there are a few guys who remain unsigned: Donovan Smith, David Bakhtiari, and DJ Humphries, with the latter two recovering from injury. So, did Washington do enough to protect their new investment at quarterback? Only time will tell, but for now, this fan remains very skeptical about Washington's offensive tackles. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think the Commanders did enough to protect our new quarterback? Leave your comments below, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any updates on our Commanders, and remember, hail to the Redskins! ****.